First of all, those goals means that we are recording data and monitoring them. So that's number one. If you don't have any, I think that's the first one that we should aim and organize. We there is many parameters we can think of, but start with the what I tell farmers that they don't have any of these monitoring systems. It's just start with the one that you can confidently take, and any CC goes with your practices, and then we can just keep adding to that. Again, some of these parameters are not only a result or solely result of the nutrition. It goes hand in hand with the environment, with the practices. But we can, in terms of health, for instance, make sure that we treat less than 40% of the calves in those 2 months. It sounds like a high, but once we start looking at data, it's really a minimum that we should have. In terms of mortality, of course, we should aim to zero, but something that is more realistic in terms of an industry benchmark should be lower than 3 or 5%. And then it comes to growth, which is again in the dairy cows. We have daily weights and composition even, but in the heifers, the only thing that we could measure in terms of what is the result of all these efforts that we do is growth. And on that, we have several rule of thumbs, as you said. Like the first is weaning, or even weight before weaning, to evaluate that transition and that development of the ruminant calf. We can set this goal of tripling the birth weight by 3 months. So I think with those two indicators, we can really tell, okay, are we doing a good phase in the milk phase and a good transition?
Well, I think the big things are liquid feeding. So that's your milker, your milk replacer. The second thing is actually not so much nutrition as management, and that's all health and hygiene and stress management. So these young calves have a very underdeveloped immune system. So when we put stressors on them, like weaning, like transportation, like dehorning, debutting, all of those things can trigger a very irregular immune response that can really redirect some of the energy and protein from growth and towards just fighting off basic infections and stressors. And so that really has long-term impact. So even if we're feeding the same liquid feed, it might not be used nearly as effectively if the environment's not clean, if all of our stressors are stacked together. So we're debudding and castrating and transporting all on the same day, which I have seen once and I don't recommend it. But all of those things are come into play, and trying to spread that out as much as possible to create a low stress environment with a lot of liquid feed. That really is the key to pre-weaning heifer management. So optimal nutrition begins with colostrum and goes on from there. I mentioned the immune system before, how it's underdeveloped. So that colostrum is really key in kickstarting some passive immunity to make sure that they're able to weather some of those bacterial challenges that they'll see, and to withstand some of those stressors that they'll encounter in the first few weeks. And the key to being able to set that up is through colostrum. So early and often is the key. I've seen some producers who take only the highest quality colostrum that they have and use that as the first feeding, and then use lower quality later on, regardless of the dam it's coming from. I think that's a really cool strategy to do. So you just use a Brix meter to sort of test your Brix index, and then feed accordingly, so that you're feeding on quality, not on dam calf linkage directly. So the overall mantra I would use for colostrum management is that you don't know what you don't measure. So if you don't test your colostrum quality, or you're not using a colostrum replacer, in which case that quality control is done for you. But if you're not doing that, then you don't really know how good your colostrum is, or really what you're doing with it. So I very much, if you're using your own colostrum, whether it's pooled or not, check the quality of it, because some of the quality will surprise you. There's seasonal differences in quality as well. So having a reservoir or sort of an archive of pooled colostrum samples from your high production months that you could use in your lower production months might be a very advantageous tool for your farm. The big key I would use is 4 liters within 4 hours. And that's just as a rule of thumb. If you can't get it all in one feeding, then do it in 2. But that first 4 hours, get as much colostrum in them as you can. So the transition milk is is your non-saleable milk between colostrum and your actual milk that you're able to sell. And so what it really has more than anything else is some of those antibodies that are really going to be successful passive immunity transfer. What we're finding more and more is even though those passive immunity antibodies may not make it all into the bloodstream, they also may play a very important role in the gut itself. So in the intestines, in the rumen, in fighting off some of these bacterial challenges that calves encounter. So in the first 3 weeks, it's a lot of E. coli related challenges. And so that's where this transition milk can come in really, really handy. So whether you use pure transition milk, actual transition milk from your cows, or whether you add some colostrum replacer or colostrum to your milk as in terms of giving them that extra boost, that's really where that benefit comes in, is keeping that antibody flow going for a few days to let the gut microbiota really establish itself and make sure that that community is healthy and thriving before we go on to regular milk.
We already have discussed the importance of the quantity, and that's, I think, that the first consideration. The other one is the quality. The quality, if you're offering at least, again, the 15 to 20% of the bird weight after a certain age, we need at least 25% of crude protein. That's more or less what whole milk has. So we need to make sure that this quantity of nutrients are turned into the right quality of growth, not only quality, and this kind of protein is necessary to support that lean growth. Also, the bacteriological aspect is very important. So we have to make sure that it's a clean feed. The other thing is the consistency. And with consistency, I'm saying that they're at the same temperature, the same concentration, or even osmolarity. We can go in the details of that if you want. And the time, as the cows respond to good consistency in the management, calves do the same, and they need a good consistency on that.
But what we've really seen in the last 10, 20 years now is a lot of evidence accumulating that rate of gain in those first 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, has an impact in the future lactation. So they've actually quantified this a few years ago, that every kilo of gain in the first 6 weeks is something like an extra 1.8 kilos of milk yield in the first lactation. And so even though that body weight gain might disappear, the calves' ability to function and calves' ability to be healthy and be a productive cow later on is really impacted by how those first 6 weeks are managed. So it's really an investment for your future milking herd, and not some short-term race to try and get them up to a certain body weight as quickly as you possibly can. I think the big thing for me is in those first week or 2 weeks is to switch to as many meals as you can that are smaller in size. So if you feed a meal that's too big, especially if you're in week 2 and you want to get up to 8 liters a day, those abomasums, those stomachs, are not big enough to hold 4 liters. And you'll see, if you do try to force it in, what you'll end up seeing is some abomasal inflammation, which just shows like up as a crash in intake, and those calves really aren't doing well. So more meals, smaller meals in the first 2 weeks is absolutely crucial, and monitor that by looking for hunger. So if those calves are drinking fast, then you have an easier time going up a step. But if they're drinking slowly or they're just getting through it, then don't step up the meal size yet until those calves are really hungry and eager to drink that bottle. The other thing that I really look for, especially in the first 3 weeks of life, is hydration. I find that with calves, hydration is probably the biggest factor in sort of predicting calf survivability and health, because they can go from very healthy to lethargic and just very morbid in a matter of hours. And so if you have a calf that's, say, scouring or just has loose feces, it doesn't even need to be scours. Really make sure you throw in an extra bottle of electrolytes in between meals so that they stay very hydrated throughout those first couple of weeks. And then once they get used to and they adapt to that plane of nutrition, then you'll start to see that reflected in their fecal scoring. And then you can taper back the electrolytes quite a bit. But the hydration is absolutely crucial to make sure that they're going to be taking in all of their milk replacer or milk as well.
From weaning to 6-9 months, is a key area in which we're trying to demonstrate that heifers still growing very fast. They need a lot of nutrients there if we want to touch the nutritional part. But interestingly, also the growth is very lean, so it's the kind of growth that we want to capitalize on. And on top of that, it's a growth that is quite cheap to get if we have the right nutrition and the right resources. So I think that's the key. And after, of course, when it comes to breeding and after, we have to make sure that we follow up their weight, so that, or we have a way to determine how to keep managing those heifers. And a few of the indicators that will help us to do that effectively is by taking measures.
Solid feed side, just calves are just like any other creatures. They need to learn and familiarize themselves with their environment and with their feed sources. And so don't feed forage when you need forage. Feed it a few weeks beforehand. So in the research that I've done, regardless of what we were doing, we always tended to find that calves started eating forage around 4 or 5 weeks of life, and it didn't matter what their liquid or solid feed program was. It was always the same time, and there was never any difference between treatments. So that forage introduction, giving them some time to get used to it at 4 or 5 weeks before you start that weaning process, that introduction of forage should be thought of as a stressor, because they're spending time and energy learning what that feed is. And so then when you're doing weaning, which is an enormous stressor, you don't want to be introducing any new feeds. When weaning is done, the stress is not. It takes a few more weeks. So want to make sure that whatever you're feeding in that first month post-weaning, they've all been introduced to prior to weaning and become familiar with. So in terms of forage introduction, I usually do it at about 4 weeks. You can do earlier. In my experience, they tend to play a lot with it more than anything else. But I tend to stagger introduction of just, liquid feed first, obviously. But then I do solid feed introduction, give them some time to learn how to do that while they're still reliant on the liquid feed. And then after a week or two of that, then I introduce forage so that they are used to they're used to the calf starter before they're used to the forage and the fiber. And then that makes sure that their starter intake is going to accelerate and not be displaced by forage intake.
Gathering relevant data, monitoring that, and use that as a tool to use with their consultants, with their nutritionists, with the calf specialists, to see the next step that we have. I think that the only way really is to going through the cycle of measuring, setting goals, reevaluating, doing things differently, and that's the only way to really guide efforts towards.
I would overall say the eagerness to get onto something like a total mixed ration in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's very important in post-weaning to remember to not stack stressors. And so if you're going from a calf starter to a grower to a TMR, make sure that's not done in one day. Make sure that there's some transition of a few days or a week even of going from one feed type to the other before you start limiting the feed type they're coming off of, because they need that time to learn how to use that feed, and that doesn't happen overnight. And expecting them to do that is going to create problems that are relatively easily avoided.